Point 7. We have finished with this. It is unnecessary to manipulate them ingeniously. So, social facts qualify as things. Law is embodied in courts. The currents of daily life are recorded in statistical figures and historical monuments. Fashions are preserved in costumes and taste in works of art. By their very nature, they tend towards an independent existence outside the individual consciousness, which they dominate in order to disclose their character as things. It is unnecessary to manipulate them ingeniously. Likewise, Durkheim recalled René Descartes and reminded us of the need for overcoming all presuppositions. For Durkheim, it is like overcoming inferior faculties like emotions, sentiments, and feelings. Only then is it possible for the sociologist to emancipate himself from the fallacious ideas that dominate the mind of the layman. No wonder Durkheim pleaded strongly for a scientific vocabulary in the discipline. Sociologists must avoid the interminacy of common sense language and be clear about the specificity of the concept they use. The subject matter of every sociological study should comprise a group of phenomena defined in advance by certain common external characteristics, and all phenomena so defined should be included within this group. It is equally important to avoid all sorts of vagueness while studying or observing an object. The physicist substitutes for the vague impressions of temperatures and electricity by the visual representation of thermometer and the electrometer. Likewise, when a sociologist studies social facts, they should not be carried away by their individual manifestation. Instead, it is important to find their expressions in tangible and crystallized forms. For example, in legal codes, moral regulations, popular proverbs, statistical figures, and religious conventions. Take an example. Suppose you are studying caste as a social phenomena. It is possible that Ambedkar and Gandhi might have experienced and responded to caste hierarchy in a different ways. But if you are participating Durkheim in a positivist sociology, you need not to be carried away by these individuals' manifestations. Instead, your task is to see caste as a thing, a structure rooted in codified laws, religious sanctions, and social customs. An important characteristic of science is its explanatory power. As sociology is scientific, it must explain social facts. For Durkheim, sociological explanations are objective and independent and cannot be reduced into psychological terms. It was in this sense that Durkheim made an interesting point that a whole is not identical with the sum of its parts. It acquires an independent character that is qualitatively different from those of its component parts. Society is therefore not identical with the sum of individuals. It is, of course, true that without individuals there is no society, but society transcends the individual. While explaining social facts, it is important to understand the supremacy of the collective over the individual. Durkheim clarified that the group thinks, feels, and acts quite different from the way in which its members would were they isolated. If then we begin with the individual, we shall be able to understand nothing of what takes place in the group. In a word, there is between psychology and sociology the same break in continuity as between biology and the physiochemical sciences. Consequently, every time that a social phenomena is directly explained by psychological phenomena, we could be sure that the explanation is false. It was in this sense that Durkheim, as his other substantial works suggest, provide the sociological explanation for social facts like suicide, division of labor, and moral education. In fact, as Durkheim categorically stated, the determining cause of a social fact should be sought among social facts preceding it and not among the states of individual consciousness. Likewise, the function of a social fact needs to be seen in its relations to some social end. Take, for instance, the punishment as a social fact. For Durkheim, its cause is the intensity of the collective sentiments that the crime offends. Likewise, its function is to maintain these very sentiments at the same degree of intensity. No wonder for him when a teacher punishes the child, its function is not to cause physical suffering to the concerned child, but to restore the sanctity of the moral order in the classroom. To explain a social phenomena, as Durkheim argued, it is to find its cause as all as its origin, as both cause and function are essentially social, not be reduced to the individual psyche. The crafts of scientific sociology that Durkheim constructed gave a new momentum to the discipline. Sociology, he asserted, must come out of the influence of philosophy and establish itself as science. The principle of causality, he believed, can be applied to social phenomena, and sociology, as a result, would be free from ideological analysis. It would be neither individualistic nor socialistic. Instead, sociology would be an objective study of social facts. This objectivity might reduce the popularity of the discipline, but then, as if speaking like a prophet, Durkheim said, "We believe, on the contrary, that the time has come for a sociology to spurn popular success, so to speak, and to assume the exacting character befitting every science. It will then gain in dignity and authority what it will perhaps lose in popularity. Assuredly, the time when it will be able to play this role successfully is still far off. However, we must begin work However, we must begin to work now in order to put it in condition to fulfill this role someday." Let us now forget the Durkheim, despite his strong plea for scientific sociology, was deeply concerned about the moral foundation of society, its stability and order. Possibly modern or industrial societies and their implicit differentiation, specialization, and division of labor made him confront a new problem. Gone are the days of simple societies characterized by mechanical solidarity, but then, can modern societies survive merely through egoistic individualism and selfish interest? No wonder he involved a strong critique of utilitarianism and its celebrations of the atomized individual trying to maximize one's pleasure. Instead, Durkheim constituted to retain his belief in the moral supremacy of the collective, and he saw that the increasing differentiation in a modern society paradoxically would lead to more and more mutual dependence and create organic solidarity. It was this consistent search for the basis of moral order that led him to explore the domain of religions and the sacred, and school and moral education. In a way, in both Auguste Comte and Emile Durkheim, you are witnessing an endurance to reconcile positivist sociology with social order and stability. Positivism, it seems, is both an assertion of social science as well as quest for order and stability. Does it mean that science is yet another form of ideology? See Unit 1, where a similar question has been answered in the affirmative. Let us now complete the social and economic 7.1 exercise to check out our own understanding of Durkheim's idea of social facts. Reflections and Action 7.1. For Durkheim, social facts are external and coercive, and social facts should be treated as things to be studied throughout. studied through concentration expressions in legal codes, religious expressions, proverbs, customs, etc. Based on the above notion of social facts, write on a separate sheet of paper your answers to the following questions. Question number 1. What can be given as an examples based on your own experience to substantiate Durkheim's statements that the social facts are coercive? Do you think that human beings are constantly seeking to escape the binding aspect of society? If they do so, in what way do they achieve this? Give examples. After collecting a few proverbs relating to gender relations, find out in what way do they capture the status of women. 7.5 Critiques of Positivism. Yes, in the French sociological tradition, you saw the evolution and consolidation of positivism. But then it reached the other parts of the world and became a powerful sociological method. Positivism had its appeal. It sought to give a scientific status to the discipline. The search for precision, objectivity, causality, and value neutrality made it acceptable. This positivist social science found its logical culminations in the cult of numbers, in the mathematization of social phenomena, in the urge to reduce qualitative human experiences into quantified statistical figures, and it has also its remarkable achievements. But then you can guess that not everyone can feel comfortable with positivism. First, it is possible to say that what is applicable in the domain of nature is not necessarily applicable in the domain of human society. Because unlike nature, society consists of reflexive agents who think, argue, contest, and through their practices and actions transforms the world. Hence, society cannot be subject to be abstract universal generalization. Positivism, it is alleged, undermines the creativity, reflexivity, and agency of social actors. As you have already learned in the Unit 6, interpretative sociology was a refreshing departure from the positivist tradition. Second, it can also be argued that the so-called ethical neutrality of positivism reduces it to a mere technique, separated from moral political issues. And paradoxically, it is precisely the politics of positivism, the enhanced establishment to legitimize itself, often use its scientific nature. In other words, positivism can prove to be pro-establishment, status quoist, non-critical, and non-reflexive. In the 20th century, this critique of positivism came rather sharply from critical theorists or the adherents of Frankfurt School of Marxism. What is asserted is that the science has lost its emancipatory power. Instead, science itself has become an integral component of the establishment. In fact, the experience of war, large-scale violence, the growth of fascism, the spread of the cultural industry, and the emergence of the authoritarian personality, in other words, the darkness of the 20th century led these thinkers to speak of dialectic of enlightenment. No wonder from Adorno to Horkheimer to Marcuse, the central thrust of their argument was the positivist science was nothing but a formal form of instrumental rationality leading to domination and manipulation of human and natural resources. They critiqued this instrumental rationality and pleaded for a more critical, reflexive, qualitative, and emancipatory social science. Third, as you have already learned in Unit 6, postmodernists deconstruct the very foundation of science. No wonder, for postmodernist positivism loses its cognitive power and legitimacy, and in a way the distinction between objective science and the subjective narratives gets eroded. Sociology becomes yet another narrative filled with the biographies and life histories, and a non-positivist postmodern sociology does not look fundamentally different from cultural studies. As you understand, positivism emerged at a time when sociology was trying to establish itself as science, and positivism continued to be its appeal, as was also pointed out at the end of the Unit 4. But then, with the passage of time, with the new experiences leading to disillusionment with the so-called neutrality, of science, and with the new sensitivity to reflexivity and creativity, we see the growing critique of positivism. Positivism has indeed lost much of its appeal. You can understand this changing intellectual milieu if you concentrate on the following two specific critiques of positivism. A reflexive sociology resisting methodological dualism. Reflexive sociology, as put forward by Alvin V. Gardner, is a meaningful alternative to positivism. Gardner, an American sociologist, wrote with a high degree of moral sensitivity and critique positivism. He warned us of the methodological dualism implicit in positivism. The dualism separates the noun from the noun, subject from the object, fact from value. Not solely that, it views that if the sociologist engages politically, emotionally, and aesthetically with the objective of his or her study, the scientific nature of the discipline would suffer. This cold objectivity, as Gardner would argue, is essential an expression of alienation, that is, alienation of the sociologist from his or her own self. It is like looking at sociological knowledge as just a piece of amoral technique. Methodological dualism is based upon a fear, but this is a fear not so much of those being studied as of sociologist's own self. Methodological dualism is the at bottom concerned to constitute a strategy for coping with the feared vulnerability of the social self. It strives to free him from the disgust, pity, anger, and from the egoism or moral outrage from his passions and interest. On the supposition that it is a boldness and disembodied mind that works best. It also seeks insulate the scholar from the values and interest of his own other roles and commitments, on dubious assumptions that these can be anything but blinders. It assumes that the feeling is the blood enemy of intelligence and that there can be an unfeeling, unsentimental knower. Gardner, however, pleads for methodological monism and asserts that the separations between the knower and the known must be overcome because you cannot know others without knowing yourself. That's why self-reflexivity is absolutely important. To know others as a sociologist cannot simply study them, but must also listen to and confront himself or herself. Knowing is not an impersonal effort, but a personalized effort by whom? Embodied man. Reflexive sociology invites methodological monism and therefore alters the very meaning of knowledge. It does not mean it remains merely a piece of information. Instead, it becomes an awareness. It generates a self-awareness and new sensitivity. Reflexive sociology you would appreciate is heavily demanding, unlike positive sociology in which you can remain neutral and apolitical. Reflexive sociology demands your moral commitment and ethical engagement. You cannot separate your life from your work, Gardner wrote. Reflective sociology then is not a characterized by what it is studies. It is distinguished neither by the persons and the problems studied nor even by the techniques and instruments used in studying them. It is characterized rather than a relationship it establishes between being a sociologist and being a person, between the role and the man of performing it. Reflective sociology embodies a critiques of the conventional assumptions of segregated scholarly roles and has a vision as an alternative. Its aim at transforming the sociologist's relations to his work. Take an example. Suppose you wish to study the phenomenon called slum culture. A way of doing it is of course a highly positivist technical research. You hire research assistants and send them to a particular slum with the questionnaire and instruct them to distribute copies of it after random sampling. The data you gather get classified and quantified, and you make your conclusions. These are the conclusions derived from hard facts, and never do you feel the need to engage yourself as a person with the slum. In other words, if you dispassionate exercise is not different from the way of mathematicians solves puzzles or a scientist work in a lab. Now, Wellner's reflexive sociology would oppose this kind of research. Instead, it make you reflect on your own self and your politics and morality.
Possibly you are urban, upper class, English speaking, and relatively privileged. What does it mean for you to understand the slums culture? Isn't it in the fact that their suffering cannot be separated from your privilege? Can you understand them without questioning this asymmetrical power? These questions born out of the self-reflexivity and would possibly create a new sociology which is far from objectifying the world, trying to create a new one. Possibly new trends of sociological research emanating from the feminist and the Dalit movements resemble this sort of reflexive sociology, because if in these search trends once seems not just technically objective but essentially a high degree of empathy as an urge, understanding the suffering and trifling of an alternative praxis. B. Agency and structure, process of structuration. Another significant critique of positivism has come from Anthony Giddens, a leading sociologist of our time. Giddens' book, New Rules of Sociological Method, is a turning point. It is a text in which he studies the intellectual trajectory of the discipline and negotiated with the interpretive terms and reflected on the set of new rules. It does offer an alternative and positivistic scientific sociology. Giddens is categorical about the fact that the nature of human society are two different realms of inquiry. Nature is not a human production, but society is being perpetually created, nude and altered by human agents. That is why there are limits to the natural science research and sociology. In sociologists In sociology, argues Giddens, those who still wait for a Newton are not only waiting for a train that won't arrive, they are in the wrong station altogether. This seems to be the reason why he began his intellectual conversations with phenomenological, ethno-methodological traditions, the way these interpretative sociologists seeks to understand meanings, that is the meaning that conscious human actors attach to the world and constructs their knowledge of the everyday world they live everyday world they live in. Although for Giddens these are possibilities in these traditions, we need to see beyond. Because the meaning you and I attach to the world has to be situated in a social context, and asymmetrical resources and capabilities often characterize this context. Take an example. Imagine yourself as a student in the classroom. It is, of course, true that you are not a puppet silently performing the prescribed role. Instead, you are a creative agent attaching meanings and creating an intersubjective world called the classroom. But then there is a problem. Your agency or freedom is not unlimited, because differential unequal resources might characterize the classroom, teacher versus student. Even a simple site like the classroom is in fact a site of conflict and contestation. Giddens therefore argues that interpretative sociology alone is not sufficient. It is equally important to be aware of the complex relationship between the agency and structure. This critical creative engagement with methodological issues led him to put forward a set of rules which can be summarized as follows. First, sociology is not concerned with a pre-given universe of objects. Instead, sociology deals with a world that is constituted or provided by the active doing of subject. It is in this sense that the production and reproduction of society has to be treated as a skill performance on the part of its members. Let us understand it. Suppose you are studying a phenomenon called caste. Even a rigid system like caste, you realize, is not pre-given. Instead, human agents are perpetually creating and transforming what we call as caste society. That is why lower caste movements or Dalit movements or divergent reforms takes place, and the social reality that sociologists study remains perpetually vibrant and alive. It is a skill performance which is in perpetual flux. Second, Although society is a skill performance, the creativity of the social actor, as you have just learned, is not unlimited, since all of us, irrespective of our creativity, are historically located social actors working under certain conditions. It is in this context that we ought to be aware of the limits, constraints provided by the social structure. But then, what is the interesting about Giddens is that he is talking about the duality of structure. Structure must not be conceptualized as simply placing constraints upon human agency, but as enabling. An example would make this point clear. Imagine that you are speaking a language. No matter how creative you are, you cannot speak whatever you wish. You have to follow the grammar, a set of rules, but then it is not just an experience of constraint. Language also enables you to speak. Moreover, a living language is not static. Though they are linguistic expressions and practices, people make changes in the structure of the language. That is what Giddens regards as the process of structuralization, and says that for him to inquire into the structuralization of social practices is to seek to explain how it come about that structures are constituted through action, and reciprocally how action is constituted structurally. In a way, the process of structuralization enables him to overcome the duality of structure and agency. Yes, you cannot imagine yourself without the rules that the structure provides, but at the same time, you are not a puppet. You can innovate, experiment, and later the structure. Third, Giddens asserts that a sociologist cannot escape the language that lay actors use to make sense of their world. That is why meaningful sociologist research requires immersion in the form of life which the sociologist seeks to study. Immersion does not, however, mean that the sociologist has to become a full member of the community. This only means the ability to participate in it as a assemble of parties, assembly of practices. And finally, sociological concepts and asserts Giddens are based on double hermeneutic. The reason is that the social actors themselves have already interpreted society as being a skill performance, and hence the sociologists further interpret it within their sociology theoretical schemes, mediating ordinary and technical language. About hermeneutics you will read in Unit 8. These debates and contestations you need to realize have enriched the discipline, and it is important that you become aware of these multiple voices within the discipline. Let us, at the end of our discussion, complete the reflection and action exercise 7.2. Reflection and action 7.2. Structures are as much constraining as enabling. People constantly innovate and interpret the given structures. Explain the above statements with the illustrations from contemporary situations, and write a short note on the process of structurations. Discuss your note with fellow learners of MA Sociology at your study center. It's a request to the academic counselor to organize an essay competitions on this topic and send the top 10 essays to the coordinator of MSO 002. The best essay will have a surprise appearance. 7.6 Conclusion. In Unit 7, we had discussed the antecedents of positivism in the context of tremendous strides made in the science and of the general milieu of enlightenment. Auguste Comte is considered the founder of sociology, for he tried to conceive the similar methodology for the social sciences and the study of society. Positivism, as we can see, had a tremendous impact on sociology and in some ways helped establish in us as a discipline. The propositions and theories of Comte however, have been refined, especially in the case of Durkheim. He by far has been responsible for defining the subject matter of sociology and in laying out the rules to study society. Subsequent thinkers have critiqued his visualization of an overarching cohesive society, but Durkheim still lay out a roadmap for us to follow and be clear in distinguishing the individual acts from societal acts. The subsequent methodologies and perspectives in sociology attempted to privilege the agency of individual. We have discussed Giddens' work as an example of this approach. Another critique that came strongly against positivism came under the Goldner, who felt that positivism with its methodological coldness separates the knower from the known, and therefore he pleads for a reflexive sociology. Many in the social sciences, especially in sociology and anthropology, have recommended reflexiveness. The issues of who represent who has come under severe debate not only in anthropology but also in general debates in the social sciences. With the postmodernist critique of unilinear theories, there is an increasing tendency to look for multi-vocality. The question that we can be asked in this context is what relevance do theories which support generalizing tendencies have in the globalizing world? Further reading. We have Alan Kenneth, the explorations of in classical sociological theory, seeing the social world, and Giddens and Anthony 1984, the Constitution of Society, outline of the theory of structuralism. So this is the end of the unit 7.